Welcome to the LTC Peregrine DadCast. I'm Henry Cameron Allen, your host. I've got my regular co-hosts here today, John Garvin. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good to see your face. And here is Dr. Dave Roberts, and he's a colleague and friend and fellow Peregrine as well. So thanks for being here, Dave.
Always a pleasure, Henry.
And he's also a professor. And when we start talking about education and, my overriding sense of my purpose here, not only with the Lost Travelers Club, which is our organization that is an empowerment organization for peregrines, i.e. parents who have outlived our beloved children, and a way to navigate life in community with others who are on their grief journey. But my overarching purpose that I found that really kind of led me to the Lost Travelers Club and its creation and the way it's been developing is universal life skills education. And when we talk about life skills, we're talking about all of the essential skills that every human being on the planet will learn in some measure or another and apply daily at every stage of life. And these are things like communicational skills. These are things like emotional literacy. These are things like financial literacy. These are things like hygiene and nutrition and environmental literacy, tech literacy in the digital age. And one of the things that doesn't make the list very often, because these things aren't really talked about globally yet, the way I think they ought to be, is grief. Grief as a universal life skill. Mm-hmm. We're all going to experience grief in one measure or another. And I want to have the conversation today about each of us, our relationship with grief, with death itself, the big sleep, I call it, and where we learned those skills, how we feel either proficient or deficient in one aspect of grief as a life skill. I think that'd be a really interesting conversation to have with you today. And anyone who's watching can certainly leave comments in the comments section below and join in the conversation. We don't want to be talking heads here. We want to engage people in a worldwide dialogue around these topics that stem from fathers' grief, men's grief. And so, Dave, do you want to go first? Do you want to talk about sort of your situation, your story, and go back to when you first became aware of the skills, the essential skills of life? Where did you learn them? And was grief part of the conversation?
Well, excuse me. Well, Henry, as you know, my history, I've danced with grief and death since I've been 5 years old.
That's right.
The first event that kind of marked my grief journey, unbeknownst to me, was when my father left when I was 5 years old, leaving my mother to raise me as an only child. And the conversation that we had, it wasn't so much about the death of that relationship, the death of the family unit. It was more like, how do we move forward from here? So death was never really a conscious part of the conversation. As I've come to learn, that's pretty typical, is that we talk about ways that we can continue to go on living as opposed to the way that we can deal with dying and our own eventual mortality. And that's been something that in Western society has been lacking for a long time. But as I got older, I began to experience more and more death. My maternal grandmother, eventually my mother, my aunt that had raised me, my mother and my maternal grandmother and my aunt all raised me, numerous friends, numerous individuals that I had known that had died of a variety of different things. I mean, death was all around me, but I still kind of looked at it as I kind of had a distant relationship with it, which basically my idea of a distant relationship was no relationship with it at all.
Yeah.
I acknowledged that, okay, it's a sad event when this is occurring in others. I could allow myself to grieve and then just move on with my life. And then things totally changed on March 1st, 2003, when my daughter Janine transitioned of a rare and aggressive form of cancer. At the time that she had transitioned, I was an addictions professional for the state of New York. I was a clinical supervisor. I had just gotten my master's in social work. I had worked with a variety of different individuals regarding trauma. And ironically, the traumas that I worked with involved death or loss of some point, whether it was actually due to an actual physical loss or due to a loss of a relationship, a divorce, a loss of a job. And I had worked with that, and I thought very effectively. But after my daughter's transition, I realized that, boy, I hadn't really done a hell of a lot of work on what death meant to me and how I could begin to transcend or develop the life skills to deal with my own death.
But surely,
Because
wasn't it part of your training though? I mean,
no,
really?
no.
Mm.
The training that I got, Henry, there's very little in my undergraduate education and my graduate education regarding dealing with death. As far as my actual background as an addictions professional, the one exposure that I got to death was Kubler-Ross's stages of grief as it applies to death. And
Right.
that was the blueprint that I had always used. And I kind of figured, well, it kind of made sense. But then after my daughter's transition, that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
My life didn't make sense. And all the training in the world I had couldn't help me make sense out of what happened. So
Right.
what I needed to do was, I think what finally helped me was having a lot of support, such as some support from other peregrines like yourself, there's some practitioners, particularly as Reverend Patty Farina, who was
Mhm.
the person who showed me that I could have a relationship with death by transforming the relationship that I had with my daughter to create that continuing bond, and that I could integrate that. So, and the training that I got basically after that was after my daughter transitioned, was reading books and also, talking to other individuals and realizing that death was never a part of the conversation. That though I was surrounded by death, I never really had an intimate relationship with it. Because me, like many in Western society, just said, heck, let's just focus on living. We'll worry about dying when we get there. But what I've discovered is that the more we can entertain death as a part of our own life while we're still living, the more fulfilled life we're going to have, and the more meaningful interactions we're going to have with individuals. And we're going to be able to access the discussion around a very difficult topic because of our own renewed relationship with it. So that's where I am at this point, and my narrative continues to evolve as I just, with each day. And one of the things we talked about is fear of death, I think, prior to recording. I do no longer say if something happens to me. It's always when something happens to me, when I transit. There's no if with this. I mean, I'm here for a very predetermined amount of time on Earth, in this physical existence. I know I'm going to be dancing in another dimension somewhere at some point. And the fear, I don't have the fear as much as dying as I do, I think, in terms of the steps getting there, in terms of losing my autonomy, losing my physical independence, losing my cognition, because I'm a teacher, I communicate, and losing those two things, my physical autonomy, my ability to communicate, my ability to think coherently, all of those would be losses that I would grieve and my family would grieve. But as far as the actual fear of death, I don't, because I know what I'm going to after I die. I know that I am going to survive death, and I'm going to be, like I said, dancing in another dimension somewhere in some form of energy.
Well, I want to come back to you and talk about why you think in careers like social work, like addiction, where death is in your face on a regular basis, why it's not part of the conversation, why it's not part of the training. That's a really big question, but I want to ask John your sort of journey with death, your dance with death, and where did you learn the skills to cope?
Okay, well, I didn't learn the scopes to cope with death until my son passed away, till my son transitioned. I, a reckless driver pulled out from a stop sign and, hit him on his motorcycle, and he died instantly. And, he's 20 years old, and I got the news from my brother, and he told me and hugged me, and my mom was there, and she hugged me, and and I didn't do anything to harm myself or to harm anybody else at the house. I just took it all in, and I processed it, and I'm still processing it today. It's been 2 years now, and I learned a lot by going to this grief share class with my mom. It's been going on for, I'd say, probably 10 weeks, and it's very meaningful to me. And the two counselors there, they talk wisdom, and they talk highly upon going into another world when we pass this universe of our body and our soul becomes one. And they talked to us yesterday a little bit about why is the question you ask as soon as you get up to heaven, I suppose, or get up to the place, where you live in eternity. And, that's one of the questions I always thought of is like, why did God or why did my higher power take my only child at 20 years old? And to me, that was wrapping around my head and wrapping around my head. And, until I went to this grief share class, they were teaching me the reason why, and they told me anger in it also, and I didn't get angry at all. I knew that there's a heaven, I knew there's a God, and I knew that my son is living in eternity. He is living in paradise. And one of the questions she asked yesterday was, John, she asked the class sitting in a little circle, she goes, if you would want your son to come back here, or any of your loved ones, would you want them to come back here and be with you again? And for a second, I said, sure, I'd love for my son to be back here with me, to do what he loved, to experience this world. And then she says, well, if he does, he'd be dead. Let me get back to paradise up there. It is so good up there, and I love it so much. And it brings out the spirit in me. I get to see, even though he was young, his great grandparents, his my father, and and he just and I thought to myself like that. Then I came down this morning, I talked to my mom, and I says, Mom, I don't believe what what Anna was saying about if you would let your son come back here, would you? I said, and I told her that. I says, I would love Adam to come back and to enjoy his life and enjoy his motorcycles and enjoy his college degrees and the things he did on the side, like hunting and fishing and being with his friends who were so very important to his life. And then my mother tells me, she was directly stated this. She goes, oh, you're being selfish. And I thought to myself, how was I being selfish? And then she says, God wouldn't just remember, Adam is living in paradise up there, she told me again. And I believe he is working in paradise. And we're all put on this earth to experience that as we transition into that new experience into our lives, into our souls and our beings. So, I can't say I'm happy for him to be up there, but I got another thought into my mind about the being in paradise up in heaven. And when I get those strange thoughts, which I get like every day, something like that, and that's what I'll think about a lot too. He's in paradise up there, and I use that word quite often because it means happiness, joy, free, all the good words around this language.
Yeah.
So I think that's all I really have to say for right now.
I think you're very, very much, it's a very common thing for people to say to peregrines that for you to long for your child to be here with you, back here with you, is a selfish thing. I've heard it from other people. I don't know, Dave, if you heard, have people said that to you when you express longing?
Not to my face, anyway. They haven't said that.
Yeah.
But I think it's misunderstood because I especially in early, well, any time during our walk, down the path of grief, and we're going to have yearnings for the physical presence of our children, regardless, depending on what's going on at that particular moment. The yearnings for their physical presence may be stronger in the beginning with early grief, and it may lessen, but it's still going to be there. So it isn't a selfish thing. To me, it's just what I think our viewers need to understand is that it's a product of the fact that, one, that relationship and bond continues to be strong, is going to be forever strong. And secondly, it's part of the human experience that we want our loved ones, whether it's our child, whether it's our grandparents, whether it's our parents, we wish for their presence during particular milestone or important events in our own lives or in the lives of those that they've touched. And so to me, if somebody was going to tell me it was a selfish thing, I would basically come back with here's why it isn't selfish. Here's what you need to understand from the peregrine perspective.
And I think it's a very important meditation. When somebody introduces a thought like that, and of course, they mean well. You know that, of course, they want you because they love you. They want you to be happy. They want you to not suffer, right? The way that we love our kids and we don't want them to suffer, right? But being in the physical means that we're going to suffer. I mean, that's the basic tenet of Buddhism, right?
Oh, yeah.
Existing is suffering. And so it's how you navigate that. And I think that love is selfish because you want the person who's the object of your love, whether it's your parent, your child, your pet, your best friend, your partner, you want that love to be reciprocal. You give love and you receive love. And the feeling of being on the receiving end of our child's love is like no other. It's its own category of love. And so when people have said to me, it's selfish for me to want him back, maybe it is, but in the sense that all love inherently has that quality to it. It has a selfishness is not a crime. It's become sort of a moral, tenet that we mustn't be selfish. We must be selfless. Well, if we're selfless, we're giving all of ourselves away, and we don't understand the dichotomy between pleasure and pain. We don't understand You know, if we were to give all of it away, all of our power, and held nothing for ourselves, I think that's a more difficult road to walk. And so what I say to you, John, and what I say to Dave and every other Peregrine that I know is forgive yourself for that selfishness. It's absolutely an appropriate kind of selfishness to want your child. I miss Cameron's laugh. I miss the twinkle in his eye, and you know, his the smell of his hair, and the jokes that we used to share, and all of those things. Would I love that back in my life? Absolutely, I would love it. But as I'm sure Dave will agree in his experience, and John now with you, acceptance is the first step. Not toward healing, because this is something that I don't believe can be healed from, but in learning how to cope and how to navigate and how to survive the passing of our children. I think acceptance that their physical will no longer be here and you are changed forever.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it gets me out of that.
Yeah.
That consistent yearning is that I can tell myself is I can't want for something that isn't possible to have anymore. And I realize that having Janine back in the physical existence is not something that's going to happen at all. It's not going to happen because she lived for 18 years and her purpose in life was fulfilled in the physical plane in 18 years. Which in spirit time, 18 years is a long time, and human experience time, it isn't. But, you know, but in terms of matters of the soul, 18 years can be an eternity. And I kind of, you know, I kind of learned that now I cannot want for something that I can't, it's not possible for me to have. So I don't let myself stay there for too long just because of that. And then that helps me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for Janine, 18 years was a lifetime.
Yep.
You know, for Adam, 20 years was a lifetime. For Cameron, 13 years was a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. So what I know to be true now in my journey, see, I didn't have anybody in my family die close to me until I was already an adult. I knew all my grandparents. I knew all my great-grandparents. I even knew a great-great-grandfather. Longevity runs in my family, except for my son. And so, you know, I didn't have a relationship with death, and but I was fascinated by it. I was really curious about it. I've always had this sort of, not in a morbid way, but more in a scientific way. I would spend my free time in the library at school, and I would be looking at medical journals, you know, that talked about and showed the inner organs of people and how we're made, and what, you know, the brain and the cutaway of the eyeball and what makes, you know, light refract. I mean, all of that stuff was fascinating to me. You would think I'd have become a scientist instead of an artist. But the first major grief event in my life was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. He was the first person in generations that had passed and that I was close to, you know. And it was hard to sit with my family because nobody knew what to do. Nobody had talked about death before. Nobody had talked. The only thing I knew about death was that my father was petrified at the thought that he wanted to be buried above ground, like in a drawer, because he was afraid of being buried alive. So from my early childhood, that's what I knew about death, was that there's a possibility that you'll be buried alive, you know? So that was interesting. And then I had this beautiful moment. Well, preceding that, we were all sitting around the table after the funeral of my grandfather. And all of a sudden, we started telling jokes. And it felt like my grandfather's spirit, because he was a jokester. He loved telling jokes. He had a very distinctive laugh that sounded like Barney Rubble from the Flintstones. And we all started cracking up. I mean, to the point where tears were flowing. including my grandmother, who was sitting at the head of the table, who had just lost her life partner, over 50 years married. And we were laughing, we were screaming with laughter. And then all of a sudden, my grandmother got very angry, very upset at everyone that we were having this kind of lightness at this very, very sacred moment. And I think in hindsight, she felt that way. And I don't know if you guys have experienced that kind of a trigger, like all of a sudden, like why isn't everybody as upset as I am? And we all should be, right, in this moment. But she did. And I felt later that it was maybe out of an obligation, like a cultural obligation, that suffering, deep suffering, must accompany the mourning. In Judaism, we sit Shiva. It's called sitting Shiva, which is a period after your beloved has passed, whoever it is. And if it's your partner, you cover all the mirrors in the house. You don't brush your hair, you don't put on makeup, you don't bathe, you're in very simple clothing. My grandmother used to dress to the nines, wear a lot of jewelry and makeup and all that stuff. And she sat on a crate in the middle of the living room and rocked and wailed. I mean, in a slip. You know, you see many in movies, images that come out of Europe of women, all in black and wailing and screaming and throwing themselves sometimes even into the grave, after their partner or their child, whoever. And there's something very healthy about that. There's a release, and you cover the mirrors. It's partially superstitious because that's a portal between worlds and they don't want any negative spirit energy coming through. But it's also that you must not be distracted by how you look, because that is selfish. That you really must commit to your mourning. And sitting Shiva is usually about a week of that active mourning. And then if it's your partner or your child, someone that close to you, you're allowed a year of mourning. If it's a sibling or an aunt or uncle or even a grandparent, I think it's like a week. And then you put it away and you move on with your life. You live your life. But if somebody very close to you, like a spouse or a child, then you get to actively mourn for a year, which I think is really healthy too. That night, it was about 3 a.m, and my grandmother was sitting in the dining room having a cup of tea. And I got up to go to the bathroom or something, and I came in and sat down next to her. I took her hand. I said, "How are you doing, Grandma?" She said, I feel like someone has taken off my dress and I'm flying naked through the air like a fairy. She started laughing, and I laughed with her. And then we started crying together. And it was just such a sense of relief. It was such a sense of release for her, because he had been ill for a long time. And for those of us, that like Dave and myself, who had a period of time where our children were in their, medical situation. It was for me, it was a relief that I no longer had to feed him 30 pills a day, and that he was now free of the fog that had descended over him. And so over time, my perspective on death shifted and changed. His passing was in mid-September, and Halloween was a huge favorite holiday for him. So that first Halloween without him was brutal. But then on the heels of that came Dia de los Muertos, which is the Mexican holiday of like All Souls, All Saints, and where we honor our ancestors. One thing that doesn't get talked about a lot. This was the first inkling for me, the first shift in my perspective on it was the recognition that our children are now our ancestors. They are our blood relations that preceded us into the next world. They are now our ancestors. I get tingles thinking about that even still, and it's been 15 years, right? But it was that first Dia de los Muertos. What you do is you create an ofrenda, which is like a shrine to your ancestors. Anyone you've lost, your parents, your child, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, whoever, and you light candles, and it's very colorful, and you fill it with flowers, and it's really an intentional shrine to honor the spirit of your ancestors, to acknowledge and invite them to still be with you, to live on in you and through you. And I thought that was really powerful. But then that opened me up to the idea of, well, what is death really? I know what I've been taught. And in some camps, people think there's nothing. When you die, you die. And then it's oblivion. There's nothing. There's no other world. It's the end. Some people believe that a death in this physical world is a birth in the next world. And the way that we celebrate a birth, a new birth, in the physical world is the way they are received into the next world by the ancestors. That there's a huge party, there's a huge welcome, it's an outpouring of love and gifts and flowers and just, you know, all of that. I love that idea that a passing across the threshold, what we call death in this life, is a birth into the next. There are people who believe in reincarnation, you know, and I grew up all over the world, so I saw every conceivable representation of death. But because of my scientific mind, that wasn't enough for me. That was all cultural. That was all tantamount to superstition for me. Heaven, hell, purgatory, you know, I mean, all that stuff. It's such a mix in the world of different perspectives on death. But what I found worked for me, what I vibrated with, was from a scientific physics standpoint, everything is frequency. Everything is vibration, right? Energy. And we know it's been proven conclusively by the science of physics that energy and frequency can't be created and they can't be destroyed. They just transmute, they change form. Yeah, wow. That was a huge aha moment for me, because I thought, okay, well, if the frequency that is Cameron, that was here in the physical when he was here, 13 years he was here, 14 if you count his first year of life. And if that frequency that was him, his consciousness, his personality, everything that made up the him of him, not the physical, but the personality, if that's just changed form, then he didn't die. That's why I don't like using the word death. I don't like using the word loss. We know precisely where our kids are. We didn't lose them like a set of keys, right? Or a contact lens. We didn't lose them in that sense, right? But what you both alluded to, and I agree with, is that they're very much alive in us and through us in another way of being alive than what we are right now. And we're going to, like you say, we're going to dance in a different dimension. We don't know what that looks like. We don't know what that is. It's a mystery. It's a great mystery. The story of Peter Pan. Peter Pan, I think he's asked, you know, aren't you afraid to die? And he said, no, I think death is going to be the greatest adventure of them all. And Cameron was a mad, passionate fan of the story of Peter Pan. And for me, he'll always be the boy who would not grow up. He passed at age 13, which is the age of Peter Pan in the story, right? Right on the threshold of his manhood. And I see him in that light. I see him as Peter Pan. I see him as utterly magical. I see him influencing people everywhere, flying around, inspiring goodness, ushering other children who are crossing the threshold across so that they're comforted. He had no fear of death. And what that did was to walk with him through that relieved me of any fear that I had. And I looked at it simply as, when we talk about God, we talk about the creative force of the universe. Most of it is a mystery. And there are some things that there is no answer why. Why my kid? What I came back to was why not? Why not my kid? It was obviously his time and his way. And that's the simple truth. Otherwise, he'd still be here. Right? So it's up to us who are left here in the physical to be open to everything, to be open to every possibility, because the truth is nobody knows. We don't even know what consciousness is. Right? And so we're free to imagine.
Well, one of the things when you talked about, do we really die? I remember one of the teachings from The Afterlife of Billy Finger by Annie Kagan is that, Billy says to Annie, death is just simply birth in reverse. If you look at it, that's, there's a lot to be said for that, particularly when you take a look at, children who have reincarnated, are the reincarnated souls of ancestors past. You begin to, when you see that, you begin to question, do we really die, or do we just go into a different form of energy, or in another dimension, do we pick up or do we do different things that we did in the physical world? So that's the one thing that kind of resonated with me, when you started talking about, do we really die? Is that teaching from the Afterlife of Billy Fingers?
I love that. I love that. I don't know that I will ever believe that death is a real thing. I think it's an illusion. And so now what? Where does that leave us? That leaves us to imagine. And that's all we can do with these mysteries. Why did Adam get cut down on his motorcycle on that day at age 20? There may never be an answer. Why did Ken, get brain cancer that only men over 50 get at 11?
Yeah. And why did my daughter Janine get a type of sarcoma that was basically a childhood cancer? She got that as an adult child.
An adult, exactly.
So
it's a waste of time for me to sit in wondering why, or asking God, why? To me, that it doesn't matter why. Some people do know why. Some people who have that journey, they know why their child passed, and that's a different journy. But I think for me, it's there's no sense in asking why. It's acknowledging and accepting that it is the case. It happened. It can't be reversed, and that he does live on in me and through me. If I allow
on and through me, through the way he passed. He loved his motorcycles and died on his motorcycle with what he loved. And God wanted to take him, I believe, on what he loved to do. And that's the reason why he was called and he transitioned into another dimension. So his motorcycle and him have a lot going on together with his existence here on Earth, I believe. And, I believe that's true. And pretty much most of the people believe that in our families also.
And that brings you comfort, doesn't it?
It does. And my mother said that to me the night my brother told me, I'd say about a half hour later. And she says, John, she says, Adam died on the thing that he loved most. And I said, Mom, you're right. And that calmed me down a lot. You know, it didn't make me nervous and frustrated. I was like, oh, he died on his motorcycle, the way he
Yeah.
made me wanted to go, you know. So, you know,
What a great visual that Adam is ascending to heaven on a motorcycle. I mean, what a great visual that is.
yeah, he loved it so much. And, you know, he was very, 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 very careful. You know, he wore, of course, a helmet and goggles and gloves, and he was all suited up, you know, like he obeyed all the motorcycle rules that were in the book, and he just, it was just his time to go. And I accepted that as a fact, you know.
That's a
So,
real turning point. That's a real
mhm,
turning point that you've reached in your journey.
yes, it is.
And now that frees you to move from mourning into grieving. Dave, you were going to say something.
I think part of acceptance is learning to live with the unanswered questions and realizing there are some questions that are never going to be answered, never to our full satisfaction. So one of the things that's helped me on the path to acceptance is living with the ambiguity, living with the fact that there are certain questions that I'll never have the answer to, but I'm still okay with it anyway. And in
Mhm.
spite of that, I'm still willing to re-engage in a life of meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And that's part of the human condition, right?
Mhm.
How many things do we still not know? We're
Mhm.
striving to know. We are curious beings. We want to know more and more and more and more. But how many things do we still not know? How do we stay attached to a planet that is spinning in space, moving through space, and
Mhm.
we have no sense of the speed or the mass of everything outside of us? And we don't know if we're alone in the universe, right? I mean, there's so many unanswered questions. And so we are already living with the mysteries.
Yeah.
And I think that to own that at whatever level you are at, and to say, I'm okay with living with this mystery as well, because I'm going to cross the threshold someday. And everything that I don't know in this limited bag of bones
It's funny
to be
when
revealed.
it's funny when you mentioned about, the mystery of life. It reminded me, and I think I'm paraphrasing this. It's a Lakota saying that I found in a book by Kent Nurburn called "The Wisdom of the Voices in the Stones: Life Lessons in the Native Way." It's that one, and this really stuck with me, is that he got this from a Lakota elder, said, life isn't a puzzle to be solved, it's a mystery to be honored. And I look at that, and it's like there's so much profound wisdom in just those two. So often we're trying to solve puzzles when we just sometimes just need to honor the mystery of life.
And some puzzles we can solve, and it's
Yep.
okay. It's part of our human way to try and solve them. But
Yep.
it's also okay to release the puzzles that can't be solved.
And just honor it for the mystery that it is, and for the unknown that it is.
And
That
just be there, because
just
it
be there.
effortlessly gives other people permission to be there too.
Mm-hmm.
Get caught up like my grandmother did in the shoulds. I should be acting this way in my grief. I should expect everyone to feel the way I feel
Mm.
at the funeral or after the funeral, right? And I think that there are other options. Your grief journey is your grief journey. There are going to be people around you who are grieving differently. If you're in a partnership and you've both experienced the grief around your child, your partner may experience their grief journey very, very differently than you do. And either you can create the space and the respect for both ways, or you can't. I know many, many marriages that have split because of this. Because again, we're not taught as a universal life skill the process of grieving and the processes of grieving universally, right? There are as many ways of grieving as there are people grieving. And so to honor that mystery, how is it that there are so many common threads among humanity,
Mm.
and yet we all grieve differently?
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are some cultures that honor that journey in a very healthy and accepting way, accepting of the mystery, and they stay inclusive with the spirits of their ancestors, including their children, they create the space for them to still be around in whatever frequency they're going to be around, right? There are others that don't. There are others that, I know a lot of people who had children complete suicide, and that's a different kind of grief and a different kind of guilt. I think we all at some point ask ourselves, what could I have done differently that might have led to a different outcome? And with suicide, it's a different story. It's deeper, and I think that there's another kind of mystery. But the common thread, and people whose children have been murdered, is a whole other pain level that I can't imagine either. But what's true, just like pregnancy and birth, right? There are common threads, but each one is unique in its way. I think that if we identify the common threads in the grief journey, that will lead us to an understanding of these different dimensions, these different processes of grieving. There's the shock, what I call the Big Bang, right? It's where your whole universe changes in a moment. You're never going to be the same again. And then it's chaos and it's numbness, and you don't know how to get through it. You don't know how to feel. You don't know what to feel. You don't know that you have feelings anymore. I mean, it's just kaboom. And then little by little, the dust settles and you start reconnecting with your emotional life. And at some point, you hit a very thin membrane between mourning and grieving. Mourning, I believe, is a temporary passive state. You can do nothing with it but be in it. People can try to comfort you. People can bring you food. People can give you space. They can be there for you. But then you cross through that membrane. You break through out of the vortex of mourning, and you break through, and then you start living again. You start meeting other people. You start connecting with and finding community in your grief that can be there with you on the journey. That's what we're doing here. And for me, it brought me a deep sense of purpose again, because I lost my purpose. That's what I did lose for a time. I didn't lose Cameron, but I lost my sense of purpose. If I'm not a parent, right? My grandmother used to say, you're a parent if you're parenting. Well, I'm no longer parenting. So now what am I, right? I'm a peregrine. I'm on this journey that requires me to be courageous. It requires me to be resilient. It requires me to draw on power that I didn't even know I had. And that's when you break through, when you get to that understanding and forward momentum and re-engaging with a sense of purpose. Because then you can use that purpose, you can channel your grief into that purpose in honor of your child. That allows them, that opens up the doorway for them to work through you. The world gets to meet them through you because you get to tell their story. You get to bring them to life in the imaginations of everybody who knows their name. That's why it's important to speak their names, right? It can be a beautiful thing, this grief journey, if we let it. I have no fear, period. That was the gift in the grief for me, both re-engaging with my purpose, but also the fact that the only fear I really could identify when I was parenting was outliving my child. That was the only fear I had. And when that was resolved and I got to the other side of it, now what? What's the worst that can happen to us, guys? The worst that could happen to us has happened to us. Now what? Bring it on. We survived.
Mhm.
Most peregrines survive. It's not easy, but it does get easier, and we do survive. And I think as humans, we are hardwired to survive. We are survival
Mhm.
wired, right? And so even on your darkest days, and we can wrap up with this, know that you're not alone. Know that there are other people on this journey with you at different stages of the journey that have wisdom that you don't yet have. You could still be in your deep shock and mourning, which I know many of you are. Look at the three of our faces, look into our eyes, and you'll see our kids are still alive in us, that we have broken through into another level, and you'll get there too. And I really want the Lost Travelers Club to be one way of reconnecting with your purpose again. Because what we're doing, this is our first project, right? The Fellowship of Fathers. It won't be our last, but we wanted to do something to channel our grief into goodness, to help remove the stones out of the paths of the people who are coming up behind us, or maybe are lagging a little bit and caught in that vortex and don't know how to break through. That's what these conversations are about. Right? Join us at the Lost Travelers Club. Go to losttravelers.club, become a member. There are going to be some great things, a couple of books that are coming out, workshops, other projects that we're going to do to channel our goodness in honor of our children, in community with other peregrines. And then sign up for either the Fellowship of Fathers or the Mamaship Circle, which is new. And that one's happening monthly. Ours is weekly. You don't have to be in the podcast, the DadCast, if you don't want to be. We usually spend a time before we start recording, checking in, having a conversation that can go on as long as it needs to. So just join us. It's a weekly Zoom group. It's a circle of other men, other fathers who are channeling our grief into goodness. We do support one another, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week, don't we, John?
We do.
Right?
Yes,
And Dave, I mean, we're engaged with one another.
Yep.
I've been talking to Dave's class about the grief journey in a completely different perspective than they're probably ever used to hearing.
It's wonderful.
It's really wonderful. So there are ways to get back to wonderful, guys. That's the message of the big sleep. We're all gonna get there. Right. So let's make good use of the time that we've got. Any last thoughts before we sign off, gentlemen?
No, but I'm just grateful that I have this group to look upon each week. And I really appreciate you, Henry Cameron, and you, Dave, and it's just wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We appreciate seeing your face here every week as well. We have other regulars who show up. People come and go. Sometimes people are here, sometimes they're not. It's a flow. And so don't feel obligated if you want to join us. There are many, many levels. There are many ways to join us. You can even become a volunteer with the Lost Travelers Club. We're doing a lot of really good things. Dave, anything you want to add?
I always tell individuals to show grace to yourself at any time during the journey. This is a very challenging, it has a lot of ups and downs. Just show grace to yourself and realize that at any particular moment, you are doing the best that you can, given the set of circumstances you find yourself in. And always remember that.
That's right.
Good. I'll remember that also.
Well, and thank you for joining us this week and every week. If this is your first one, go back and look at the previous ones, because every single one is a jewel. Every one of us brings forward wisdom like you saw today. And it's from the heart. There's no script. We're all just thinking about our own experience. We're comparing notes. We're sharing perspectives. Some of us are faith-based in our grief journey. Others have found different ways of navigating. So this is a safe place to just be where you are, who you are, and allow yourself as a man to be vulnerable amongst brothers who get it, who understand. See you next week, guys. Signing off.
Bye-bye, everybody.